The envelope wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped to my front door like a summons. I stood in the dim hallway light, tearing through the heavy paper, my heart hammering against my ribs before I even read the first line. The bold text demanded $247,000 for immediate payment on a business I had never owned. In the silence of my empty apartment, I didn't scream. I just felt my life quietly, violently snap in half. The hallway of my building always smelled faintly of lemon floor wax and old carpet, a scent that usually signaled safety, the end of the day, the quiet closure of my commute. But that Tuesday, the smell was overlaid with the sharp, metallic tang of adrenaline. It hit me before I even turned the key. There was something taped to my door. It wasn't a friendly note from a neighbor complaining about noise, and it wasn't a package delivery slip. It was a thick, white envelope, secured with aggressive strips of red adhesive tape that looked violent against the beige paint. The return address was bold, black, and officious. Department of Collections, Federal Revenue Bureau. I stood there, my work bag slipping from my shoulder to the crook of my elbow, staring at my own name typed in capital letters, Vivian Henderson. It looked like an accusation. I ripped it down, taking a chip of paint with it, and fumbled with my keys. Inside my apartment, I didn't even turn on the lights. I stood in the gray twilight of the foyer and tore the envelope open. The paper inside was heavy, the kind of bond used for judgments and final warnings. Final demand for payment. My eyes scanned the dense blocks of legalese, skipping over the statutes and the threats of seizure until they landed on the number in the center of the page. It was bolded, boxed, and impossible to ignore. Total amount due, $247,812.40. I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that bounced off the walls of my empty living room. It had to be a joke, a scam. I had seen those phishing emails before, the ones with the blurry logos and the bad grammar, trying to scare you into buying gift cards. This was just a physical version of that. I was a 33-year-old marketing coordinator. I made $62,000 a year. I rented a condo I was hoping to buy one day. I drove a 5-year-old sedan, and I paid my taxes via an online portal every April like clockwork. I didn't have $247 to spare, let alone $247,000. But as I looked closer, the laughter died in my throat. The paper felt too real. The watermark was visible when I held it up to the window. The letterhead referenced a tax ID number that wasn't my Social Security number, attached to a business name I had never seen before. Hearthstone Renovations, LLC. And then, right below that, my name again. Vivian Henderson. Responsible party. My stomach gave a hard, wet lurch. I dropped my bag on the floor and walked to the kitchen island, placing the letter down as if it were radioactive. I needed to verify this was fake. I needed to see the clean, boring reality of my credit report to reassure myself that the world hadn't tilted off its axis. I pulled out my phone and opened my credit monitoring app. Usually, I only checked it when I got the monthly notification that my score was stable. A boring 720 that I was proud of. The app didn't load the usual green circle. Instead, a bright red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Alert. New public record filed. My thumb hovered over the screen, shaking slightly. I tapped the banner. Tax lien. Status. Pending. Amount? $247,000. I watched, horrified, as the digital needle on my credit score gauge slid backward. Dropping like a stone, it plummeted 140 points in a single graphic animation. 580. Poor. High risk. The air in the condo suddenly felt very thin. I sat down on the bar stool because my knees had turned to water. This wasn't a scam. The government, or at least, the agency that functioned like the heavy hand of the government, believed I owed them $250,000. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the letter on my nightstand like a loaded gun. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the number, $247,000. It was an amount that didn't just mean debt. It meant ruin. It meant never buying a house, never getting a car loan, never passing a background check for a better job. It was a life sentence. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I called the number. Not the number on the letter. I was still clinging to a shred of hope that the letter itself was forged, but the official number from the Federal Revenue Bureau's government website. I waited on hold for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I sat on my living room floor, my laptop open, my phone on speaker, listening to a repetitive, tinny saxophone loop that seemed designed to break the human spirit. I watched the sun move across the floorboards. I didn't eat breakfast. I didn't drink coffee. I just waited. Finally, the music cut out. Federal Revenue Bureau. Agent Miller speaking. ID, number 492. How can I help you? The voice was calm, flat, and terrifyingly bureaucratic. I received a notice. I said, my voice cracking. I cleared my throat and tried to sound professional, like the adult I was supposed to be. I received a notice about a debt. There must be a mistake. It says I owe nearly $250,000 for a business I've never heard of. I gave him the reference number from the letter. I heard the click-clack of a keyboard on the other end. Silence stretched for a long, agonizing minute. Ms. Henderson, Agent Miller said, his tone shifting from polite to guarded. I am looking at the file for Hearthstone Renovations, LLC. Are you stating you are not the owner? I have never heard of Hearthstone Renovations. I said, gripping the phone. I work in marketing. I don't own a business. According to our records, this entity was formed 4 years ago. Miller recited, sounding bored. You are listed as the sole member and responsible party. The business address is listed as 1210 Oak Creek Lane, Oakhaven. I froze. Oakhaven was a small town 40 minutes north of the city. I had never lived there, but my parents lived in the next town over, less than 10 miles away. That's not my address, I whispered. The filings are associated with your social security number. Ms. Henderson, Miller said. I can see the filing history here. Quarterly payroll tax returns were filed for 2 years. Then they stopped. But the withholding didn't. The penalties have been accruing for 18 months. My social security number? I asked. The room was spinning. Yes. And the original formation documents were signed by you electronically. I didn't sign anything. I insisted, panic making my voice shrill. This is identity theft. You have to take my name off. It is not that simple, Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. Since you are the responsible party, the Bureau looks to you for the trust fund recovery penalty. These are unpaid payroll taxes. Money was withheld from employees and not remitted to the government. That is a serious offense. Ms. Henderson. But it wasn't me. I recommend you speak with a tax professional, Miller said, until we receive a substantiated claim of identity theft with a police report and an affidavit. Collections will proceed. The lien has already been recorded. Wait, I said. Please, have a good day, he said, and the line went dead. I dropped the phone. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. Oakhaven. 4 years ago. My mind began to race, rewinding through the timeline of my life. 4 years ago meant 2020, the pandemic. The world had shut down. I had been living in the city, terrified and isolated. But I had driven out to see my parents every few weeks, standing on their porch with a mask on, dropping off groceries. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, clawed its way to the surface. It was a Tuesday in late summer of 2020. I was sitting at my parents' kitchen table. The air conditioner was broken, and the house was stiflingly hot. My father was pacing, complaining about the lockdown, about how the government was killing the little guy. My mother was fluttering around with a stack of papers. Vivi, honey, she had said, sliding a sheet of paper toward me. Could you help us with this? It's just a form for the relief aid. You know how your father gets with the computer. I hadn't even read it. I was tired. I was worried about my own job security. I just wanted to go home. Where do I sign? I had asked. Just right there, she had said, pointing to a highlighted line. And put your social. It's just to verify the household income since you used our address for your mail last year. It hadn't made total sense, but they were my parents. They were the people who taught me to ride a bike, Who paid for my braces? You don't audit your parents. You trust them. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to run to the bathroom. I retched into the sink, my body rejecting the realization before my mind could fully process it. No. I said to the empty bathroom. No, they wouldn't. I washed my face, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I needed to know the extent of the damage. I called my bank. The hold time was shorter, but the news was worse. Ms. Henderson, the bank representative said, sounding apologetic. I do see a flag on the account. It's a pre-levy hold warning from the tax authority. It's not a freeze yet, but it means they are monitoring the funds. What does that mean for my paycheck? I asked. It gets deposited on Friday. If the levy order comes through before Friday, the rep said gently, the bank is legally required to surrender the funds to the agency. We don't have a choice. I would advise you to resolve this with them immediately. I hung up. I was standing on the precipice of losing everything. If my paycheck was seized, I couldn't pay rent. If I couldn't pay rent, I would be evicted, with a tax lien on my record. No one else would rent to me. I would be homeless within 30 days. I didn't go to work on Thursday or Friday. I called in sick, my voice sounding genuinely wrecked enough that my boss didn't question it. I spent the days in a fugue state, researching tax fraud, reading horror stories on forums, and trying to build the courage to do what I had to do. On Saturday morning, I got in my car and drove to my parents' house. The drive was 45 minutes of pure, concentrated dread. The highway stretched out gray and endless. Every time I passed a police car, I flinched, as if they knew I was a fugitive, a responsible party for a criminal enterprise. When I pulled into the driveway of the split-level house where I grew up, it looked aggressively normal. The lawn was freshly mowed. My father's truck was parked in the same spot it always was. The hydrangeas my mother prized were blooming in massive blue clusters against the porch. I sat in the car for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I had the notice in my purse. It felt heavy, like a brick. Just ask them. I told myself, maybe they don't know. Maybe someone stole their identity too. I got out of the car. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing her floral apron, the one she wore when she was stress baking. The smell of cinnamon and yeast wafted out, sickly sweet. "Vivian!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt too tight, too desperate. "We weren't expecting you. You didn't call. I needed to see you," I said, my body rigid against hers. She pulled back, her smile faltering just a fraction. "Well, come in. Come in. Dad's watching the game." I walked into the living room. My father was in his recliner, the volume on the television turned up loud. A football game was blaring. He didn't look up. "Hey, Dad?" I said. "Hey, kid." He grunted, eyes fixed on the screen. "Move out of the way. You're blocking the replay." The normalcy of it, the sheer, unbothered comfort of their Saturday, made something snap inside me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter. "I need you to look at this," I said. My voice was trembling, but it was loud enough to cut through the noise of the crowd on the TV. My father sighed, a heavy, dramatic exhale of annoyance. He muted the TV, but didn't turn around. "Can't it wait until halftime?" "No," I said. "It can't." I walked around the chair and held the letter out to him. My mother had come into the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She froze when she saw the Department of Collections logo. "What is this?" my father asked. Snatching the paper from my hand, he squinted at it, holding it at arm's length. I watched my mother. I watched her eyes dart to the paper, then to my face, then to the floor. It was quick. A flicker of something that looked like calculation. "It says I owe $247,000. I said, my voice thick, "For a company called Hearthstone Renovations, a company that uses my social security number." My father lowered the paper. His face was a mask of confusion, but it felt practiced, too broad, too theatrical. "Hearthstone?" he said, looking at my mother. "Never heard of it." "Eleanor, you ever hear of this?" "No," my mother said quickly, too quickly. "Vivian, Are you sure this isn't a scam? The news says there are hackers everywhere now. I called the agency. I said, stepping closer to them, it's real. They have my social. They have a filing history going back 4 years, to the exact time you asked me to sign that form at the kitchen table. The air in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother laughed. A high, nervous sound. Oh, honey, don't be silly. That was just for the stimulus check. We were trying to help you. Then why is my name on a business tax lien? I demanded. Why is the address in Oakhaven? My mother's face did that thing again. The flicker. She looked at the letter in my father's hand, and for 1 second, I saw recognition. I saw her verify the amount, and I saw her shoulders drop. Just an inch, as if she were relieved it wasn't higher. Then, she snapped the mask back on. This happens all the time, she said, her voice taking on a soothing, condescending tone. You have a common name. Vivian. There are probably 100 Vivian Hendersons in the state. It's just a computer glitch, a paperwork mix-up. It's not a mix-up, I shouted, the volume of my own voice startling me. They have my social security number. My father slammed his hand down on the armrest of his chair. Stop shouting at your mother. Then tell me the truth, I yelled back. Stop accusing us, he roared, finally standing up. He loomed over me, using his height to intimidate, a tactic that had worked when I was 16. You come in here, interrupting my weekend, waving some piece of paper around, acting like we're criminals? After everything we've done for you? I'm losing my mind, I said, tears finally spilling over. My credit is ruined. They're going to take my paycheck. Calm down, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. You're being hysterical. You always do this. You get stressed out and you get paranoid. Remember college? Remember how you thought your roommate was stealing from you? I recoiled. That was a low blow. I had suffered from anxiety in college. Yes, and he had never let me forget it. He used it as a weapon every time I questioned him. This isn't paranoia, I said, pointing at the letter. This is a federal tax lien. It's a mistake, he insisted, sitting back down and picking up the remote. I'll make some calls on Monday. I know a guy who handles this stuff. Just leave it here and stop crying. You look unstable. I'm taking the letter, I said, snatching it back from his lap. Fine, he said, unmuting the TV. Be dramatic. Run along home. We'll fix it. We always fix your messes. I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was aggressively smoothing the wrinkles out of her apron, staring at a spot on the carpet. Mom? I asked. Your father is right, Vivian, she said softly, still not looking at me. You're overreacting. Just go home and get some rest. We'll sort it out. I felt a cold hollowness open up in my chest. They weren't going to help me. They weren't even going to admit it. I was standing in the middle of a burning building, and they were telling me it was just the sunset. I turned and walked out of the living room. But I didn't leave the house, not yet. I felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the back of the hallway. My old bedroom. It was mostly used for storage now, but my mother still piled things there. Boxes of holiday decorations, old coats, and stacks of mail she didn't want to deal with. I needed to breathe. I needed a second away from their gaslighting before I got back in the car. I pushed open the door to my old room. It smelled of dust and cedar. The twin bed was covered in boxes. On the old desk, where I used to do my homework, there was a precarious stack of envelopes. My mother was a hoarder of paper. She never threw anything away. I walked over to the desk, my hands trembling. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe evidence. Maybe just a connection to a time when I was innocent and they were just my parents. I rifled through the stack, coupons, flyers, a bill for a medical procedure from 2 years ago, a catalog, and then, near the bottom of the pile, I saw it. It was a thin, nondescript envelope. The edges were yellowed, suggesting it had been sitting there for months, maybe longer. It had been opened, torn across the top with a jagged rip. The address window showed my name, Vivian Henderson, but the address was my parents' house, I pulled the letter out. It was a single sheet of paper, perforated on 3 sides. It was a confirmation code letter. Welcome to your online tax services account. To verify your identity and activate your profile for Hearthstone Renovations, LLC, please enter the following PIN within 14 days. The date on the letter was June 14th, 2020. I stared at the paper. It wasn't a mix-up. It wasn't a glitch. Someone had requested this PIN. Someone had opened this letter. Someone had used this code to activate the account that was now drowning me. I looked at the jagged tear on the envelope again. My mother opened the mail. She always opened the mail. I held the thin piece of paper in my hand, feeling the weight of it. It was lighter than a feather. But it crushed the last remaining hope I had that this was all a misunderstanding. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, right next to the tax notice. I didn't go back to the living room to scream at them. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the back door, got into my car, and locked the doors. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. It looked exactly the same as it had when I arrived. But the people inside, the man watching football and the woman baking cinnamon rolls, they were strangers to me now. They were strangers who had sold me for $247,000. The Monday after the revelation in my childhood bedroom was not a day of action. It was a day of suffocation. I sat at my desk at work, staring at a spreadsheet of marketing analytics that looked like hieroglyphics. My headset was on, but I wasn't listening to clients. I was listening to the hold music of the federal government. I had entered the labyrinth. I learned very quickly that the truth is heavy, but bureaucracy is heavier. I spent my lunch break in my car, laptop tethered to my phone's hotspot, trying to file an identity theft affidavit. The form was 7 pages long. It asked for dates, amounts, and specific knowledge of the fraudulent activity. How did you become aware of the identity theft? The form asked. I typed, I received a collection notice for a business I do not own. Do you know the person who used your identity? My cursor blinked in that box for a long time. Yes, I typed it, then deleted it, then typed it again. Suspected family member. I requested my wage and income transcripts. When the PDF finally downloaded, it was a dense, unreadable block of codes and numbers. But there, buried in the middle of page 3, was a K-1 form. It was a tax document issued to partners in a business. It showed that for the tax year 2021, I had supposedly received a distributive share of income from Hearthstone Renovations, LLC, $32,000 of income. Income I had never seen. Income that had likely been used to justify a loan or balance a ledger somewhere. While I was eating ramen and worrying about my student loans, I printed it out. The paper felt hot in my hands. By Wednesday, I knew I couldn't do this alone. The internet forums were full of horror stories about people who tried to fight the agency by themselves and ended up inadvertently admitting liability. I needed a professional. I needed someone who spoke the language of the enemy. I found a firm downtown called Sterling, Vance Associates. They didn't have a billboard. They had a small, polished brass plaque on a building that smelled of old money and leather. I had to dip into my emergency savings to pay the consultation fee, $500 for an hour, but the fear of that $247,000 number made the cost feel irrelevant. The attorney assigned to me was named Marcus Sterling. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He didn't offer me coffee. He sat behind a desk that was completely clear except for a legal pad and a fountain pen. "Tell me," he said. I laid it all out. The notice, the call to the agent, the visit to my parents, the letter I found in my bedroom. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor in it, the desperate pitch of a woman who knows she sounds crazy. Sterling listened without interrupting. He took notes in a precise, jagged shorthand. When I finished, he capped his pen and looked at me over the top of his glasses. "This is not a simple mix-up, Ms. Henderson," he said. His voice was gravelly and devoid of sympathy, which oddly made me trust him more. Identity theft usually involves strangers. Someone buys your social on the dark web, opens a credit card, and maxes it out. That is a transaction. This? He tapped his notepad. This is an operation. What do you mean? I asked. Someone used you as the legal face of a business. He said, they didn't just steal your money. They stole your personhood. They made you the shield. That is a different fight. He turned his monitor so I could see it. He had pulled up the Secretary of State filings for Hearthstone renovations. Look here, he said, pointing to a line on the screen. Registered agent and responsible party, Vivian Henderson, email address of record. I leaned in. The email listed was Vivian H. Hearthstone gmail.com. I've never used that email. I said, I don't even have the password to it. They do. Sterling said, they created a digital twin of you. They used it to accept notices, to sign up for accounts, to verify filings, to the agency. This email is you. Every time a notice was sent there and opened, the government logged it as you being informed. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. But I can prove I didn't send them. I can check IP addresses, right? We can. Sterling said, but you need to understand the threat you are facing. This isn't just about debt. This is about the trust fund recovery penalty. He leaned forward, clasping his hands. When a business withholds taxes from its employees' paychecks, Social Security, Medicare, that money belongs to the government. The business is just holding it in trust. If that money is not paid over, the government views it as theft, not debt. Theft. He let that word hang in the air. The agency can look through the corporate veil. He continued, they look for the person responsible for the willful failure to pay, the responsible party. That is you, Vivian. You are the owner of record. You are the manager. If they decide you willfully failed to pay, even if you say you didn't know, they can assess that debt against you personally. They can take your house. They can garnish your future wages until the day you die. But my parents did it, I insisted. I didn't know. Intent is hard to prove, Sterling said darkly. Willfulness in the tax code doesn't mean you had evil intent. It just means you had the duty to pay, and you paid someone else instead. If your name is on the bank account, even if you never signed a check, they can argue you had the authority. He sat back. If we are going to fight this, we cannot be gentle. We cannot say it was a misunderstanding. We have to prove fraud. And since the perpetrators are your parents, that means you have to be willing to hand the agency the weapon that will destroy them. I stared at him. The silence in the office was thick. If you protect them, Sterling said, you accept the debt. There is no middle ground. You cannot save yourself and save them. I left his office walking unsteadily, like I had just gotten off a boat in rough seas. The city noise washed over me, but I felt completely isolated. You cannot save yourself and save them. I knew what I had to do, and the thought of it made me want to vomit. I needed a confession. I bought a digital voice recorder from an electronics store on the way home, not trusting my phone battery to last. I spent Thursday and Friday listening to old voicemails from my parents, trying to reconcile the voices of the people who sang me happy birthday with the people who had created Vivian H. Hearthstone gmail.com. On Saturday morning, I drove back to Oakhaven. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening rain. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw my father's truck was gone. That was good. My mother was always more pliable when he wasn't looming over her shoulder. I checked the recorder in my pocket. It was running. I walked into the house without knocking. My mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. The domesticity of it, the rhythmic chop of the knife against the wooden board, felt obscene against the chaos in my head. Vivian? She said, turning around. She looked tired. Her eyes were puffy. I didn't know you were coming. We need to talk. Mom, I said. I didn't sit down. I stood on the other side of the island, keeping the granite barrier between us. Your father is at the hardware store, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. He's still very upset about last week. You really hurt his feelings, accusing us like that. I saw a lawyer. Mom, I said. The color drained from her face so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. She gripped the edge of the counter. A lawyer? she whispered. Vivian, why would you do that? We told you we would handle it. You can't handle a $247,000 tax lien. I said, I know about the email address. I know about the K-1 forms. I know you used my name to start Hearthstone renovations. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing slightly. Then, her face crumbled. It was instantaneous. Her eyes filled with tears. Her chin trembled, and she slumped against the counter, looking small and fragile. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times. When she forgot to pick me up from school, when she overspent the budget, when she accidentally threw away my college acceptance letter. The victim. Oh, Vivi, she sobbed. You don't understand. We were drowning. Tell me, I said, my hand instinctively going to the pocket with the recorder. Tell me exactly what you did. It was the medical bills, she cried. Your father's back surgery. The insurance didn't cover half of it, and then the credit cards. We couldn't get a loan for the business. We had contracts lined up. Vivi, good contracts, but we couldn't buy the materials because our credit was ruined. She looked up at me, mascara running down her cheeks. We just needed a fresh name, just for a little while. We used your name because you have such good credit. We were so proud of you. You used my name to open an LLC. I stated, needing it on the recording. And you opened bank accounts? We had to, she sniffled. To get the loans, we meant to pay it all back. We really did. But then the supply chain costs went up, and the jobs took longer, and we just fell behind. You stopped paying the payroll taxes, I said. You took the money out of your employees' checks and you kept it. We needed it to live, she shouted, the sadness suddenly flashing into anger. Do you have any idea how much the mortgage is? How much groceries cost? We were trying to keep this house. We were trying to keep the family afloat. So you sacrificed me. I said, don't say it like that, she snapped. She stood up straighter, the tears vanishing as if they had never existed. We gave you everything. Vivian, we paid for your car insurance through college. We helped you with your first apartment deposit. And now, when we're in trouble, you hire a lawyer? Against your own parents? You committed fraud. I said, that's not asking for help. That's a felony. It's only fraud if you call it that, she said, her voice dropping to a hiss. It's family business. The back door opened. My father walked in, carrying a bag of mulch. He stopped when he saw me. He looked from my face to my mother's tear-streaked cheeks, and his expression hardened into cement. I thought I told you not to come back until you calmed down, he said. She got a lawyer. Frank, my mother said, pointing a shaking finger at me. She's trying to build a case. My father dropped the mulch on the floor with a heavy thud. He walked over to the table and sat down, not looking at me. He looked old, defeated, but not sorry. Sit down. Vivian, he said. I'll stand. We did what we had to do, he said, staring at his hands. The medical bills were crushing us. $200,000 in debt before we even started the company. We couldn't work under our own names. The garnishments were taking everything. So you put the garnishments on me. I said, it was supposed to be temporary. He insisted, 1 or 2 jobs. Clean it up. Close it down. But the hole got deeper. You know how it is. No. I said, I don't know how it is. I pay my taxes. Don't get high and mighty with me. He barked. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. We were protecting you from the burden. Protecting me? I laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. You put a lien on my life, and we can fix it. My mother interjected. She rushed to a drawer near the fridge, the junk drawer, where she kept batteries and takeout menus. She rummaged through it and pulled out a manila folder. She walked over to the table and slid it across the surface toward me. It stopped right at the edge. Just sign this, she said, her voice pleading again. That's all you have to do. Dale, our consultant. He said if you sign this, he can talk to the agency for you. He can work out a payment plan. He can get the lien removed from your name. I looked down at the document. General power of attorney. It was a standard legal form, but it was already filled out. Grantor. Vivian Henderson. Grantee, Frances Henderson and Eleanor Henderson. It gave them unlimited power to act on my behalf regarding tax matters, banking, and legal claims. And there, right next to the signature line, was a small, cheerful yellow sticky tab with an arrow. Sign here. I felt a chill go through my bones that was colder than any winter wind. They didn't want to fix it. They wanted to silence me. If I signed this, they could admit to the debt in my name, set up a payment plan they would never pay, and keep the shell game going for another 5 years. They could legally bind me to their disaster. You want me to give you power of attorney? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. After you stole my identity? It's the only way to talk to the IRS without dragging you into court. My father said, it protects you. Vivian, it keeps your name out of the mud. My name is already in the mud, I screamed. I reached out and picked up the folder. My mother's eyes lit up for a second. Hopeful. I'm not signing this, I said, and I'm not helping you hide this anymore. I threw the folder back onto the table. It slid across and hit my father's arm. Vivian, wait, my mother cried, reaching for me. Don't touch me, I said. Do not touch me. I backed away toward the door. My father stood up, his face red. If you walk out that door and file papers against us, he shouted, you are dead to this family. Do you hear me? You are choosing money over your own blood. No, Dad, I said, my hand on the doorknob. You chose money. I'm just choosing to survive. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car in the lane. I drove for 10 miles before I had to pull over onto the shoulder of the highway because I couldn't breathe. I sat there, gasping for air, clutching the recorder in my pocket like a lifeline. I had it. I had the admission. We used your name. It was supposed to be temporary. But instead of relief, I felt a crushing, profound grief. I had just orphaned myself. That night, alone in my condo, I poured a glass of wine and stared at the dark window. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from Lucas, my younger brother. He was 26, the golden boy, the one who always got the new cleats while I wore hand-me-downs. He still lived in the apartment above their garage. Mom can't stop crying. The text read, she says you came over there and threatened to put Dad in jail because of some paperwork mix-up. She says you're trying to destroy the family. I stared at the screen. They had already spun the narrative. To Lucas, to the aunts and uncles, to the neighbors. I wasn't the victim. I was the ungrateful daughter attacking her aging, struggling parents over money. It's not a mix-up. Lucas, I typed back. They stole my identity. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then a new message. You always have to be the victim, don't you? Dad's heart isn't good. Viv, if stress kills him, that's on you. Don't contact me until you apologize. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the table. That's on you. The guilt was a physical weight, a heavy blanket designed to smother me. I almost believed it. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should have signed the form. Maybe I could just pay the debt over 30 years. Then, my phone buzzed again. Not a text. An email notification. I picked it up wearily, expecting another lecture from a relative. It was an alert from my credit monitoring service. Identity Guard alert. New inquiry. I opened the app, my thumb hovering over the screen. Date, today, time, 7:45 p.m. Inquiry. Type, credit card application. Issuer, Capital One. Applicant, Vivian Henderson. I looked at the time. 7:45. That was 2 hours after I had left their house. 2 hours after I had refused to sign the power of attorney. They hadn't spent the evening crying. They hadn't spent it reflecting on their mistakes. They had realized I was no longer a compliant resource. They realized the window was closing. So they had gone to the computer, used my social security number, which they still had memorized, and tried to open one last line of credit to extract whatever value was left in my name before I could freeze it. They were strip mining me. The guilt evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, hard rage. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was just a host body they hadn't finished feeding on. I took a screenshot of the alert. I forwarded it to Marcus Sterling with a subject line that read simply, "It's happening again." Then I walked to my computer, logged into the 3 credit bureaus, and placed a total freeze on my existence. It was done. The war had started. The digital clock on Marcus Sterling's wall read 2:14 in the afternoon, but it felt like midnight in my soul. I was sitting in one of his uncomfortable leather guest chairs, watching him speak into a speakerphone with a level of aggression that made me flinch. "We are filing Form 14039 immediately," Sterling barked. "My client has already provided a sworn affidavit. We are requesting an immediate hold on all collection activities pending the identity theft investigation." The voice on the other end was tinny and bored. "We can place a marker on the account, Mr. Sterling. That will pause the automated levy for 60 days. But I have to remind you that the responsible party designation remains active until the fraud unit clears the file. If the investigation concludes she is liable, the interest will have continued to accrue during the pause." "Understood," Sterling said, and hung up. He looked at me. "We bought time," he said. 60 days, maybe 90 if they have a backlog. But that is it. The guillotine is paused, not dismantled. "So I'm still the owner?" I asked. "In their computer?" "Yes," Sterling said, organizing the file in front of him. "To the Federal Revenue Bureau. You are still the CEO of Hearthstone Renovations, which means we need to use these 60 days to build a wall of evidence so high they cannot climb over it." I nodded, but my hands were cold. The temporary hold felt less like a victory and more like a stay of execution. "I want you to find the physical footprint," Sterling instructed. "Corporations are paper creatures, but they live in the real world. Go to the registered address. See who is there. See who knows you." I took the afternoon off work, using my remaining vacation hours, and drove north. The address listed on the Secretary of State filings for Hearthstone Renovations was 1210 Oak Creek Lane. Suite B? On paper, it sounded legitimate, professional, a place where contractors met to discuss blueprints and permits. In reality, it was a strip mall next to a discount tire shop and a vape store. 1210. Oak Creek Lane was a shipping and mailing center, the parcel post, the kind of place that rented mailboxes to people who didn't want to be found. I walked in. A bell chimed above the door. The air smelled of cardboard and packing tape. A young guy with a nose ring and a band t-shirt was leaning on the counter, scrolling on his phone. "Can I help you?" he asked, not looking up. "I hope so," I said. I tried to project the same authoritative voice Sterling used, but I just sounded tired. "I'm looking for Suite B." He smirked and pointed to the wall of brass boxes to my left. "You're looking at it. Suite B is just the designation for our box rentals." I walked over to the wall. Box number 422. There was a piece of masking tape on the inside of the little glass window. It had 3 names written on it in black marker. Hearthstone. F. Henderson. V. Henderson. Seeing my first initial and last name scrawled there, in a place I had never set foot in, made my skin crawl. It was like seeing my name on a tombstone. I went back to the counter. "I need to ask about Box 422. I said, "My name is Vivian Henderson. I'm listed on the box." The clerk finally looked up. He squinted at me. Then his face brightened with recognition. "Oh, yeah," he said, putting his phone down. "You're Eleanor's daughter, right? The marketing one?" I froze. "You know my mother? She comes in all the time." The clerk said, leaning forward chattily, "She picks up the mail for that box every Friday. She's super nice. She always brings me cookies around the holidays. She told me you were super busy with the business, so you couldn't make it down." My stomach twisted. "She told you I was busy with the business?" "Yeah," he said. "She said you run the whole operation from the city, so she handles the paper stuff for you. A real family empire, right?" He said it with such genuine admiration that I almost laughed. It wasn't just fraud. It was a narrative. My mother hadn't just stolen my name. She had built a character for me. To this stranger, I wasn't a victim. I was the distant, successful boss who was too important to pick up her own mail. Right, I managed to say. A family empire. Does she come alone? Sometimes with your dad, the clerk said, but usually it's just her, or sometimes that guy she works with, the guy with the suspenders. Dale? I asked, remembering the name from the confrontation in my parents' kitchen. Yeah, Dale. The clerk nodded. Weird guy. Always talks about government overreach, but he pays the box renewal fees in cash. So the boss likes him. In cash. I repeated. Always cash. The clerk confirmed. Hey, since you're here, do you want to grab the mail? There's a stack in there. No, I said quickly. No, I shouldn't touch it. I just wanted to verify the account. I backed out of the store, the bell chiming cheerfully behind me. I sat in my car and wrote down everything he had said. She comes every Friday. She brings cookies. She tells stories about me. It was pathological. It wasn't just desperation. It was a lifestyle. When I got home that evening, I opened the file Sterling had sent me, the full formation documents for the LLC. I had looked at them before, but only to check the dates. Now, I looked at the signature page. It was an electronic filing, but it required a scanned signature upload for the Articles of Organization. I zoomed in on the signature, Vivian Henderson. It was my handwriting, the loops on the V, the way I crossed my T's with a slight upward slant. It was perfect, too perfect. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out my old passport, my lease agreement, and a birthday card I had written to a friend but never mailed. I compared them. The signature on the LLC document was identical to the signature on my high school diploma, which hung in a frame in my parents' hallway. Not just similar, identical. The exact same pressure point on the final N, the exact same break in the H. They had scanned my diploma. They had cropped my signature out of the one document that symbolized my achievement, my escape from their small town, and they had pasted it onto the document that dragged me back. It was a violation so intimate, it felt physical. They had cannibalized my past to destroy my future. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, realizing that my parents were not just bad with money, they were forgers. The next day, the real world came crashing in to remind me that knowing the truth didn't protect me from the consequences. I was at my desk, trying to focus on a slide deck for a client, when an email popped up from Human Resources. Subject: Urgent. Compliance meeting. 2. Vivian Henderson. Please report to the HR Director's office immediately. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked through the open plan office, feeling like everyone knew. Did I look like a tax cheat? Did I look like a liability? The HR Director. A woman named Karen, who usually smiled and asked about weekend plans, was sitting behind her desk with a grim expression. Next to her was the company's legal counsel. Sit down. Vivian, Karen said. She didn't offer water. Is everything okay? I asked, though I knew the answer. We received a notification from our background check vendor, the legal counsel said. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was the public record of the tax lien. We run annual continuous monitoring on all employees in sensitive financial roles. This flagged yesterday. I work in marketing, I said, my voice trembling. I don't handle finance. You have access to the corporate credit card for ad spend. Karen said, and you have access to client data. Our policy is strict regarding employees with significant unresolved financial judgments. It's a risk indicator for internal fraud. This isn't my debt, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. I am a victim of identity theft. I have a lawyer. We have filed a dispute with the agency. Identity theft involving $250,000 in unpaid payroll taxes? The lawyer asked, raising an eyebrow. The report lists you as the responsible party for a business. That implies active management, not just a stolen credit card number. It is a complex situation, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. My identity was used to form a company without my knowledge. I am fighting it. Do you have a police report? Karen asked. I have an affidavit filed with the tax agency. I said, and my attorney is seeking a fraud determination. Karen exchanged a look with the lawyer. Vivian, we value your work here, but this is a federal lien. Until this is resolved, we have to place you on administrative leave. We cannot have an employee with this kind of liability exposure managing client budgets. Administrative leave? I choked out. Paid? Unpaid, the lawyer said. Pending the resolution of the matter or the provision of a clearance letter from the agency. That could take months, I said. I have rent to pay. I have legal fees. I'm sorry. Vivian, Karen said, standing up to signal the meeting was over. Our hands are tied. You can pack your personal items now. I walked back to my desk in a daze. I packed my succulent, my framed photo of a trip to Italy, and my stapler into a cardboard box while my colleagues watched. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I walked out of the building, the security guard holding the door for me, and sat in my car in the parking garage and screamed until my throat was raw. They had taken my job. My parents had taken my job. I was now unemployed, with a frozen bank account, a ruined credit score, and a legal bill that was growing by the hour. That afternoon, I needed answers that went deeper than the clerk at the shipping store. I needed to understand the mechanics of the theft. Sterling had explained the what, the payroll tax fraud, but I needed to understand the how. I scrolled through my phone contacts, looking for a name I hadn't thought of in years. Mrs. Gable. Janice Gable was an old friend of my parents. She had been the bookkeeper for my father's small construction attempts back in the 90s, before he gave up and took a job at the plant. She was a sweet, nervous woman who always smelled of peppermint and stale cigarette smoke. I called her. She didn't answer. I texted her. Janice, it's Vivian Henderson. I know about Hearthstone. I know about the payroll taxes. I need to talk to you before I give my lawyer your name. It was a bluff. I didn't know if she was involved, but it worked. She called me back within 3 minutes. Meet me at the park off Riverside, she whispered. The one with the duck pond. Come alone. I met her an hour later. She was sitting on a bench, wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild weather, wearing sunglasses. She looked terrified. I didn't sign anything, were the first words out of her mouth. Hello to you too. Janice, I said, sitting on the other end of the bench. I mean it. Vivian, she said, her hands twisting a tissue. I did the data entry. That's all. I keyed in the hours. I didn't sign the checks. I didn't file the returns. You were the bookkeeper for Hearthstone? I asked. For 6 months, she said, until I saw what they were doing. Then I quit. What were they doing? I pressed. Explain it to me like I'm 5. She looked around, checking if anyone was listening. It's called the float, she said quietly. Your parents. They would have me run the payroll software. We would calculate the withholdings, Social Security, Medicare, income tax. We would generate the pay stubs for the workers. So the workers saw the money coming out. They thought everything was legal. But when it came time to send that money to the government, she said, your dad would tell me to hold the payment. He'd say, we need that cash for materials this week. We'll pay the tax next week. But next week never came. They kept the money. They used it to pay the lumber yard, or the truck lease, or themselves. And the government didn't notice? Not right away. Janice said, they filed the returns, the forms that said, we owe this much. That's the trick. If you file the return, the computer doesn't flag you immediately. It just thinks you're late on the payment. It buys you 6 months, maybe a year, before the collections start. By then, you've moved the money. They stole $250,000, I said, feeling sick. It's not just them. Vivian, Janice said, gripping my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. That's what you need to understand. They aren't smart enough to come up with this. Not on this scale. What do you mean? The consultant, she hissed. Dale. He sets it up. He finds people like your parents, contractors with bad credit, people who are desperate. He sells them the package, the LLC setup, the fake address, the nominee owner, me. I said, I'm the nominee owner. They call them clean skins, Janice whispered. Fresh names with good credit. They use the clean skin to open the accounts, run the payroll for 2 years, strip the equity, and then when the tax bill finally hits, they burn the company and start a new one. Your parents were just one cell. There are others. I stared at her. The world tilted. This wasn't just my parents trying to save their house. This was a crime ring, a systematic enterprise of tax evasion using human shields. Does Dale know I'm fighting it? I asked. He knows everything, Janice said. He has friends in town. He has friends in the county clerk's office. Why do you think your parents haven't been audited before? She stood up abruptly. I can't talk anymore. I'm not going to jail. Vivian. I was just the typist. Janice? Wait, I said, I need you to testify. No, she said, backing away. You don't understand these people. They aren't just scammers. They're desperate. And desperate people with nothing to lose are dangerous. You should have just signed the paper. Vivian. You should have let them bury it. She turned and walked away fast, disappearing into the line of trees. I sat on the bench for a long time, watching the ducks fight over a piece of bread, clean skins. That's what I was to them. Not a daughter, a fresh layer of skin to be burned off. When I turned my phone back on, I had 3 new voicemails, all from my mother. I played the first one in the car. Vivian, please pick up. Your father is having chest pains. The stress is killing him. We know you lost your job. Lucas told us. See? This is what happens when you make trouble. God is punishing you for going against your family. I gripped the steering wheel. God wasn't punishing me. Their actions were destroying me. I played the second one. We can help you. Vivi, Dale says he can help you get your job back if you just drop the lawyer. He knows people. Just come home. Sign the paper. We can make all this pain go away. We love you so much. The whiplash between the threat of divine punishment and the offer of help was dizzying. It was the classic cycle of abuse. Break the victim's legs, then offer them crutches. I didn't play the third voicemail. I couldn't stomach it. I drove home. The city lights blurring in my vision. I felt exposed. If Dale had friends in the county clerk's office, if he knew I had lost my job before I even told anyone, how closely were they watching me? I double-locked my door when I got inside. I checked the windows. I felt like a stranger in my own condo. I sat at my computer, intending to email Sterling about Janice's revelation regarding the clean skins. I opened my inbox. There was a new email. It wasn't from Sterling. It wasn't from my parents. It was from a generic address. info_relay_772 protonmail.com. The subject line was just a date, October 12th, 2023. I opened it. There was no text in the body of the email, just an attachment, a PDF. I hovered over the download button. My cybersecurity training told me not to open it. My gut told me I had to. I clicked download. The document opened. It was a construction bid packet. Project: Oak Haven Municipal Center Renovation, Phase 2. Bidder: Hearthstone Renovations, LLC. Date: October 12th, 2023. I scanned the document. It was a bid for a massive project. Flooring, drywall, acoustic tiling. The total bid amount was $450,000. But the date? October of last year. That was after the tax lien notices had started piling up at the mailbox. That was while they were already drowning in debt. I scrolled to the bottom of the contract. Accepted. There were 2 signatures. One was the forged signature of Vivian Henderson, President. The other signature stopped my heart. It was the signature of a city official accepting the bid on behalf of the municipality. I recognized the name immediately. It was a name I saw on election signs every November, a name that was constantly in the local paper, cutting ribbons and shaking hands. Councilman Robert E. Thorne. I stared at the screen. Hearthstone Renovations, a company that owed the federal government $250,000, a company that was effectively insolvent, had been awarded a municipal contract by a sitting city councilman, and they had used my name to sign it. This wasn't just tax fraud anymore. This was public corruption. My parents and their consultant were laundering money through municipal contracts. Using my identity to bypass the vetting process that would have flagged them, I felt a sudden, sharp clarity. This was why they were so terrified of me fighting back. This was why Dale was helping. This was why Janice was scared. If I pulled the thread on the tax debt, I wouldn't just expose my parents. I would expose a city councilman. I would expose the whole network. I was holding a grenade, and the pin was already pulled. I saved the PDF to an encrypted drive. I printed a copy and hid it inside the lining of my winter coat in the closet. Then I walked to the window and looked down at the street. A dark sedan was parked across the road, idling. It might have been nothing. It might have been an Uber waiting for a passenger. But as I watched, the headlights flashed once, long and bright, directly at my window. Then the car pulled away, disappearing into the night. I closed the blinds. I was done crying. I was done feeling guilty. I picked up my phone and texted Sterling. I have evidence of municipal contract fraud involving a public official. We need to meet, not at your office, somewhere safe. I waited for the reply. The little dots appeared. Don't go home, Sterling replied. Go to a hotel. Pay cash. Call me from a burner phone in the morning. I grabbed my go bag. I walked out of my condo, leaving the lights on, leaving my life behind. The daughter was gone. The witness was all that was left. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, the room smelling of industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. My life had been reduced to a single suitcase and a stack of file boxes that Marcus Sterling had labeled the alibi. We were no longer just defending against a debt. We were building a timeline of my existence to prove it did not overlap with the criminal enterprise my parents had christened Hearthstone Renovations. Sterling sat at the small round table near the window, his tie loosened, a half-eaten sandwich pushed to the side. He looked like a general in a bunker. We stopped saying you didn't do it, Sterling said, tapping a pen against a legal pad. That is a negative claim. It is weak. Instead, we prove you were physically and digitally incapable of doing it. We build a cage of facts around your life that excludes Oakhaven. He began to map it out. We pulled my Easy Pass toll records for the last 4 years. We downloaded my Google location history. We requested the badge swipe logs from my former office building. It was tedious, exhausting work. I had to reconstruct every Tuesday morning and Thursday afternoon of 2020 and 2021. I had to prove that while Hearthstone Renovations was allegedly signing contracts in Oakhaven, I was buying a latte in the city, or sitting in a dentist's chair, or logging into a Zoom meeting from my apartment. Look at this, I said, pointing to a highlighted row on my credit card statement. On November 12, 2020, Hearthstone withdrew $4,000 from the business account at a branch in Oakhaven. At that exact time, down to the minute, I was paying for a parking garage ticket in the city, 40 miles away. Good, Sterling said. Scribbling? Physical impossibility. We need more of that. But the digital trail led both ways. While we were proving my innocence, we were also uncovering the depth of the deception. I had finally gained access to the full online tax account for Hearthstone. After the identity theft affidavit was filed, the agency had reset the credentials and sent them to Sterling. I logged in, my heart thudding in my ears. I navigated to the profile section. I wanted to see who had set this up, who had sat at a keyboard and typed my name. There, in the account recovery settings, was a phone number masked by asterisks, except for the last 4 digits, 4992. I stared at it. The number felt familiar, like a melody I couldn't quite place. I closed my eyes, scrolling through the mental Rolodex of my childhood. Then it clicked. It wasn't my father's cell. It wasn't the house line. It was the prepaid phone my mother kept in the junk drawer. She called it her Craigslist phone. She used it when she was selling old furniture or buying secondhand appliances, paranoid that strangers would trace her real number, 4992. She hadn't just used my name. She had deliberately used a burner phone to secure the account, ensuring that any security alerts or verification codes would bypass me completely and go straight to a device she kept hidden under a stack of takeout menus. I took a screenshot. It was small proof, circumstantial at best, but to me, It was a smoking gun. It showed premeditation. This wasn't a panic move. It was a setup. 2 days later, Sterling arranged a meeting with a special investigator from the agency's Criminal Investigation Division. Because of the potential involvement of a city councilman, the contract I had found, the case had been flagged for a higher level of scrutiny. The meeting took place in a sterile, windowless conference room in a federal building downtown. The investigator, Agent Vance, was a woman with sharp eyes and a demeanor that suggested she had heard every lie ever invented. She didn't look at my timeline. She looked at me. "Ms. Henderson," Vance said, her voice dry, "you are asking for a determination of non-willfulness. Do you understand what that requires? It means I didn't do it." I said, "No," she corrected. "It means you didn't allow it to happen. The trust fund recovery penalty is a strict liability statute. If you were the responsible party, which you were, on paper, and you had knowledge of the unpaid taxes, or if you were in a position to know and chose to ignore it, you are liable." She leaned forward. "My job isn't just to find out who signed the checks. It's to find out who benefited. Did you receive money from your parents during this time?" "No." I said, "Did they pay your rent? Your car note?" "No." I said, feeling defensive. "I support myself. Did they give you gifts? Expensive dinners?" I hesitated. "They bought me a new laptop for Christmas 2 years ago." Vance made a note. "Purchased with corporate funds. Likely. If you accepted the fruits of the fraud, the government can argue you were a beneficiary. That weakens your claim of ignorance." I felt a cold flush of shame. The laptop. I had used it to look for jobs. I had used it to write my resume. And it had been bought with stolen tax money. "Here is the reality. Ms. Henderson," Vance said, closing her folder. "You are in the blast radius. We are looking at a pattern of behavior that suggests a sophisticated network. Your parents are likely just a node, if you want to walk away from this debt. You cannot just be a victim. You have to be a witness. You have to give us everything. I gave you the contract." I said, "The one with Councilman Thorne." "That is a start," Vance said. "But we need to track the assets. Hearthstone Renovations took out loans. They bought equipment. Where is it?" "I don't know." I said, "I never saw any equipment." "Find it," Vance said. "If there are assets registered in your name, you are liable for them until you prove otherwise." I left the meeting feeling heavier than when I went in. Find it. I went back to the hotel and started digging through the credit report I had pulled on the first day, the one that had caused me to panic. I had been so focused on the tax lien that I hadn't looked closely at the other line items. I scanned the installment loans section. There it was. Lender, AmeriCredit Financial. Opened, August 2021. Original balance, $58,000. Collateral, 2021 Ford F-350 Super Duty. They had bought a truck, a $60,000 truck, in my name. I ran the VIN through a public vehicle registration database. The truck was registered to Vivian Henderson. The address on the registration was not the shipping store. It was a residential address in a town 10 miles west of Oak Haven, 881 Maple Drive. I knew that address. It was my Aunt Linda's house, my father's sister. I didn't call Sterling. I was possessed by a need to see the physical manifestation of my debt. I got in my car and drove. It was late afternoon when I pulled onto Maple Drive. It was a quiet street lined with oak trees. My Aunt Linda's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a sprawling ranch style with a detached garage in the back. I parked down the street and walked up the driveway. My heart hammering. I felt like a trespasser in my own family history. I walked around the side of the garage. The grass was overgrown, tall weeds choking the path. There, behind the garage, tucked away from the street view, was a large shape covered by a heavy blue tarp. I walked up to it. I grabbed the corner of the tarp and pulled. The plastic crinkled loudly in the silence. Underneath was a white pickup truck. It looked brand new, barely driven. The decal on the door had been peeled off, but I could still see the faint outline of the adhesive residue. Hearthstone Renovations. I stared at it. This was $58,000 of debt. This was my credit score. This was the reason I couldn't rent an apartment. It was just sitting here, rotting in my aunt's backyard. I took out my phone and started taking pictures. The VIN on the dashboard, the license plate, the mileage. Only 4,000 miles. What do you think you're doing? The voice boomed from the back porch. I spun around. My father was standing there. He wasn't alone. My Aunt Linda was behind him, looking nervous. My father looked furious. He was wearing his old work boots and a t-shirt stained with grease. "I'm taking pictures of my truck," I said, my voice trembling but loud. Since I paid for it, I figured I should see it. He stormed down the steps, crossing the yard in long, angry strides. "You have no right to be here." "This is private property. It's registered in my name," I shouted, holding up my phone. "The loan is in my name. You forged my signature to buy a $60,000 truck and you hid it at Linda's house. It's a company asset," he roared, stopping just a few feet from me. His face was a deep, mottled red. "We needed it for the hauling contracts." "What contracts?" I yelled back. "The fake ones? The ones you used to launder money?" "Watch your mouth," he screamed. He looked like he wanted to hit me. For the first time in my life, I was physically afraid of my father. "You don't know anything about business. You sit in your air-conditioned office and tap on a computer while we break our backs. I know you stole from the government." I said, "I know you stole from me." "We didn't steal," he spat. "We used the resources we had. That's how families survive. You think you're so special? You think you did it all on your own? Who paid for your braces? Vivian? Who paid for your car insurance? You owe us." "I don't owe you my life," I screamed, the tears finally coming hot and fast. "I don't owe you a felony conviction. You're ungrateful," he sneered, his lip curling in disgust. "That's what you are, a selfish, ungrateful little brat. We were building something. We were going to leave this business to you one day." "Leave it to me?" I laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. "You were leaving me the debt. You were leaving me the handcuffs. Get out," he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Get off this property before I call the police." "Call them," I challenged him. "Please call them. I'll show them the registration. I'll show them the truck you're hiding." He flinched. He knew he couldn't call the police. The bluff hung in the air between us. "Go," he said, turning his back on me. "And don't come back. You've broken your mother's heart. I hope you're happy." I took one last picture of him, his back turned, standing next to the stolen truck. "I'm not happy," I whispered. "I'm done." I walked back to my car. My Aunt Linda watched me from the porch, her arms crossed, her face a mask of judgment. She didn't say a word. She just watched me leave, choosing her brother's lie over her niece's truth. The fallout was immediate and total. By the time I got back to the hotel, my phone was blowing up, but not with apologies. My brother Lucas sent a text that was a wall of text. Dad called. He said you came to Aunt Linda's and started screaming at everyone. He said you were taking pictures like some kind of spy. You're sick. Vivian, you're actually sick. Don't ever talk to me again. I blocked him. It hurt less than I thought it would. The pain was dull, like an old bruise. Then came the call from Aunt Agatha, my mother's sister. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened to it later. "Vivian, this is Agatha. I heard what happened. I just want to say I'm very disappointed. Family protects family. We don't air our dirty laundry to the government. You need to apologize to your parents and drop this nonsense. You only have one mother." I deleted the message. Family protects family. That was the mantra. But it was a lie. In this family, the children were fuel. The children were resources to be burned to keep the parents warm. I was grieving them. I was grieving people who were still alive, eating dinner 10 miles away. I realized that the parents I thought I had, the ones who cheered at my graduation, who moved me into my dorm, were gone. Maybe they had never existed. Maybe they had always been these desperate, grasping people, and I had just been too young to see the teeth. I sat in the dark hotel room, feeling the silence press in. I was an orphan now, a self-made orphan. My phone rang. It was Sterling. "I have news," he said. His voice was brisk. cutting through the fog of my depression. Good news. I need some. I said, we found the technical flaw. He said, I had my paralegal go through the metadata of the electronic formation filing for Hearthstone renovations, the actual submission of the Articles of Organization, and the filing was timestamped on June 14th, 2020 at 10:42 a.m. Sterling said, we cross-referenced that with the IP log from the filing portal. The IP address traces back to a residential ISP in Oakhaven, my parents' house. I said, exactly, Sterling said. But here's the clincher. On June 14th, 2020, where were you? I grabbed my timeline binder. I flipped the pages frantically. June 14th, I was in Chicago. I said, my finger landing on the entry. I was at the Midwest Digital Marketing Summit. It was the only work trip I took that year before the lockdown started. No. Wait, the lockdowns had lifted for a window in June. I was there. Do you have receipts? I have the hotel folio. I said, I have the flight records. I have a selfie I took at the Bean. Perfect, Sterling said. You cannot be in Oakhaven filing legal documents on a desktop computer while you are physically in Chicago. It is the alibi we needed. It proves you did not create the entity. If you didn't create it, the foundation of their claim that you are the responsible party begins to crack. I felt a surge of relief so strong it made me dizzy. It was a crack in the wall, a small one, but light was coming through. There's one more thing, Sterling said. The IP log shows something else. The device used to file the paperwork wasn't your father's computer. It was a distinct MAC address. We traced the device type. It's a specialized commercial tablet, the kind used by field agents or consultants. Dale, I whispered. The name you mentioned? Sterling asked. My mother mentioned him. I said, she keeps saying, Dale says this and Dale says that. The clerk at the shipping store said a guy named Dale pays for the mailbox in cash. I closed my eyes, trying to summon the memory of him. I vaguely remembered a man coming to the house years ago, back when my father first hurt his back. He was short, balding, wore suspenders. He had brought a fruit basket. My parents had introduced him as a business coach. He's the architect. I said, my parents are the labor. But he's the architect. If we can link that device to him, Sterling said, we move from tax fraud to conspiracy. That is leverage. Vivian, real leverage. I hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. We had the truck, we had the IP address, we had the Chicago alibi. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the prosecutor. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older. The lines around my mouth were deeper. My eyes were harder. I didn't look like a marketing coordinator. I looked like someone who had survived a wreck. When I came back into the main room, the red light on the hotel room phone was blinking. I frowned. No one knew I was here except Sterling. And he had just called my cell. I hadn't given the hotel number to anyone. I picked up the receiver. Front desk? No, ma'am. The clerk said, you have a voicemail. It came in while you were on the other line. From who? It was an external call. Unknown number. A chill ran down my spine. Play it. There was a click, then a hiss of static, then a voice. It was a man's voice. Low, calm, and utterly devoid of emotion. It sounded processed, like he was speaking through a filter, but the cadence was human. Vivian, the voice said. It was intimate, shocking in the impersonal hotel room. You're making a lot of noise for someone in a glass house. There was a pause. I could hear breathing. Stop digging, the voice said. Let your parents handle it. Sign the papers and walk away. If you keep pulling these strings, you're going to pull the roof down on your own head. Another pause. Then, the tone dropped, becoming darker. We know where you are. We know about the Chicago trip. We can make this much worse for you. Don't become a liability. The line went dead. I stood there, gripping the phone until my plastic knuckles turned white. We know about the Chicago trip. Sterling and I had just discussed the Chicago trip 5 minutes ago. On my cell phone. They weren't just watching me. They were listening. I looked at my cell phone sitting on the bed. It wasn't a lifeline anymore. It was a bug. I slowly hung up the hotel phone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the parking lot below. It was empty, save for a few cars, but the darkness felt full of eyes. "We can make this much worse for you." I realized then that I wasn't just fighting my parents. I was fighting something that had teeth and reach and no hesitation about hurting me. I went to the door and engaged the deadbolt. Then I pushed the heavy armchair in front of it. I wasn't safe, but I wasn't stopping. I grabbed a notepad and wrote down one word, pressing the pen so hard it tore through the paper. Dale. If he wanted a war, he was going to get one. My life became a series of gates and keys. I moved back into my condo not because I felt safe there, but because hiding in a hotel felt like an admission of guilt. I needed to occupy my own life again, but I treated it like a crime scene that hadn't been cleared. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. He was a burly man who smelled of graphite and coffee, and I paid him $300 to replace every tumbler in the door. When he handed me the new keys, heavy, brass, jagged, I held them in my fist until they left marks on my palm. They were the only things in the world I truly controlled. Next came the digital purge. I went to the bank, a new bank, one with no branches in Oak Haven, and opened a new checking account. I transferred my meager remaining savings, feeling a spike of terror that the transfer would be blocked, that the red hand of the government would reach out of the screen and grab my wrist. When the transfer complete message appeared, I exhaled for the first time in days. But the silence was the hardest part, the silence where the shame lived. Sterling had told me that isolation was the enemy of credibility. You need a witness to your sanity. He had said, if you disappear, you look like a fugitive. If you have a support system, you look like a citizen. So I called Sarah. Sarah was my college roommate, a woman who worked in pediatric oncology and had a tolerance for tragedy that I could only envy. I invited her over on a Tuesday night. I poured 2 glasses of cheap wine, and I laid the papers out on the coffee table. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you not to ask me why I didn't tell you sooner." I told her everything. The notice, the truck in the backyard, the fake email address, the recording of my mother crying. Sarah didn't say a word for 20 minutes. She just read the documents, her frown deepening. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "Viv," she said softly, "they ate you alive. They're still eating." I said, "I'm just trying to get out of the stomach." Telling her didn't fix the debt. It didn't remove the lien. But it broke the seal on the shame. The secret wasn't festering inside me anymore. It was out in the room, breathing the same air, and the world hadn't ended. It was the first strategic victory I had won against the conditioning my parents had installed in me. The idea that family business stays in the family, even if it kills you. For the next week, my apartment became a war room. Sterling and I were preparing for the formal presentation to the Criminal Investigation Division. It wasn't a trial, but Sterling treated it like a capital case. "We are not just dumping paper on them," Sterling instructed during one of our late-night video calls. "We are telling a story. The story of 2 timelines. Timeline A is the fraud. Timeline B is your life. We have to show that these 2 lines never touched." I built the exhibits. Exhibit A: employment records showing 90-hour work weeks in the city during the alleged management meetings in Oak Haven. Exhibit B: the Chicago alibi, verified by hotel metadata. Exhibit C: the lease agreement for my condo, prohibiting commercial use, contradicting the business filings. I was printing a screenshot of my Google Maps timeline when the doorbell rang. I froze. It was 7:30 on a Thursday. Sarah wouldn't come over without texting. Sterling was at his office. I walked to the door on silent feet and looked through the peephole. My breath hitched. It was my mother. She was standing in the hallway, looking small and harmless. She was wearing her church coat, a beige wool trench that she saved for special occasions. In her hands, she held a Pyrex dish covered in aluminum foil. I hesitated. My training, the new, hard instinct I was developing, screamed, Do not open. But the old instinct, the one that smelled the pot roast and saw the familiar slump of her shoulders, whispered, "She's your mother." I unlocked the deadbolt. I opened the door. But I didn't step back. I filled the frame. "Vivi," she said, her face lighting up with a tentative, hopeful smile. "I took a chance you'd be home. What do you want?" "Mom?" I asked. My voice was flat. "I brought you dinner," she said, lifting the dish slightly. "It's the chicken and rice casserole. You know, the one you like. I thought you looked so thin the last time we saw you." The smell of the food wafted past the foil. Thyme, cream, comfort. It made my stomach cramp with hunger and nausea simultaneously. "I don't want the food," I said. "Can I just come in for a minute?" she asked. Her eyes darted down the hallway, as if she were afraid the neighbors were watching. "Please, honey, I drove all the way down here. I just want to make peace." I looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. She looked steady, determined. 5 minutes. I said, "And you leave the food in the hall." She set the dish on the floor mat, a bizarre, sad offering, and stepped inside. I didn't offer her a seat. I stood by the kitchen island, my arms crossed. She looked around the apartment, her eyes lingering on the stacks of files on the coffee table. She saw the bold text on one of the binders, Federal Revenue Bureau, fraud dispute. She flinched, but she recovered quickly. "I'm sorry about what your father said," she began, her voice soft and trembling. "He's just scared. Vivi, you know how he gets. He feels like he failed us, and he's taking it out on you. It's not right. It's not just words." "Mom," I said, "it's a truck. It's a stolen identity." I know," she said, reaching into her purse. "And we want to fix it. We really do. We've been talking to Dale, and he found a solution." My spine stiffened at the name. "Dale, what kind of solution?" "He says the problem is that the agency thinks there's a conflict," she explained. "Pulling out a single sheet of paper, they think you're accusing us of stealing, and that makes it a criminal matter. But if we just clarify that it was a family arrangement, then it becomes a civil matter. Just a debt, and Dale can settle the debt." She slid the paper across the granite countertop. "It's just an affidavit," she said. "Standard stuff." I looked down at the document. It was titled, Statement of Authorized Representation. I read the first paragraph. I, Vivian Henderson, hereby attest that I granted verbal and implied authority to Francis and Eleanor Henderson to act as my agents in the formation and operation of Hearthstone Renovations, LLC. I acknowledge that their actions were taken in good faith on my behalf, and any administrative errors were the result of miscommunication, not unauthorized activity. I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt. It was a confession. If I signed this, I was admitting that I knew. I was admitting that I had authorized them. It would transform the fraud into administrative errors. It would save them from prison. Yes, but it would lock me into the liability forever. It would make the debt mine by my own admission, and worse, it would make me a perjurer. I had already sworn to the federal government that I didn't know. If I signed this, I was admitting I lied to federal agents. "You want me to sign this?" I asked, looking up at her. "It saves everyone," she said, her eyes pleading. "Dale says if you sign this, the investigation stops. The criminal part goes away. Then we just work out a payment plan. We'll pay it. Vivi, I swear, we'll pay every cent." "You can't pay $247,000, I said quietly. "You can't even pay for the truck you hid in Linda's backyard. We have contracts," she insisted. "Big ones coming up. This document sends me to jail." I said, "Or at least, it ruins my life for the next 20 years. It says I authorized the fraud. It says you helped your family," she cried. "It says you're a good daughter. It says I'm a co-conspirator." I corrected her. I picked up the paper. "Did Dale write this?" "He's trying to help us. He's trying to cover his tracks." I said, "And he's using you to get me to do it." I ripped the paper in half, then in half again. The sound was loud in the quiet apartment. My mother's face changed. The soft, pleading look vanished. Her eyes hardened into little stones. Her mouth twisted into a sneer I had only seen directed at debt collectors and inconvenient waitresses. "You selfish bitch," she hissed. The shock of it was like a slap. My mother didn't curse. Not like that. "You'd rather see your father in handcuffs than help us," she spat, stepping closer. "After all the sacrifices we made, you think you're so clean? You think you're better than us because you went to college and got a little job in the city? I think I'm better than you because I don't steal," I said, my voice shaking but holding. "You're choosing strangers over blood," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You're choosing the government over your own flesh. When we're gone, Vivian, you're going to have nobody. You hear me? Nobody. I'd rather be alone than be a victim," I said. "Get out." She stared at me for a long moment, breathing hard. Then she turned and marched to the door. She didn't look back. She slammed it so hard the frame rattled. I stood there in the silence. I looked at the torn pieces of paper on the floor. Strangers over blood. She was right. I was choosing the strangers. Because the strangers followed the law. The blood just wanted to drain me dry. I picked up the pieces of the affidavit. I didn't throw them away. I taped them back together and added them to the binder. Exhibit D. Attempted witness tampering. 2 days later, I went hunting. Sterling had traced the IP address from the formation documents, the one that didn't match my father's computer, to a commercial internet account registered to D&R Business Solutions. The address was in a strip mall on the south side of Oak Haven, sandwiched between a nail salon and a payday loan shack. I didn't tell Sterling I was going. He would have told me it was dangerous. He would have told me to let the professionals handle it. But the professionals were slow, and my mother's visit had lit a fire under me. I needed to see the man who had written the script for my destruction. I parked across the street and watched the storefront. The sign was faded, sun-bleached vinyl, tax prep, bookkeeping, business consulting. I put a recording device in my purse, the same one I had used on my parents. I turned it on. I checked my phone. I took a deep breath. I walked in. The front room was disarmingly normal. There were plastic chairs, a majestic ficus tree that was clearly fake, and a receptionist's desk that was empty. There was a pot of coffee brewing that smelled burnt. "Hello?" I called out. A door in the back opened. A man stepped out. He was shorter than I expected, balding, with a fringe of gray hair and a pair of suspenders holding up ill-fitting slacks. He looked like a high school geography teacher who had given up. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was pleasant, professional. This was Dale. "I hope so," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm looking for some business advice. A friend of mine recommended you. Always happy to help a referral," he said, walking behind the counter. "What kind of business?" "Construction," I said. "Renovations." He nodded, grabbing a notepad. "Lucrative field. Lots of overhead, though. You looking to incorporate? LLC? S-Corp? LLC?" I said, "But I have a specific situation. My credit isn't great. My friend said you have creative solutions for that." He paused. The pen stopped moving. He looked up at me over his reading glasses. His eyes were small and dark, like beads. "I help people structure their assets efficiently," he said carefully. "Who is this friend?" "Eleanor Henderson." I said. The silence that followed was heavy. The air conditioning unit hummed loudly. Dale's face didn't panic. It went blank. It was a shutdown. A shutter closing over a lens. "Eleanor," he said. "Lovely woman. How is she?" "She's frantic," I said, dropping the smile. "Because her daughter found out about the scam." I watched him. I wanted to see him squirm, but he just sighed, put the pen down, and took off his glasses. He cleaned them on his tie, taking his time. "You must be Vivian," he said. "You look like her, around the eyes. I know about the package." "Dale," I said. "I know about the clean skins. I know you used my name to set up Hearthstone because my parents were burned. I know you filed the paperwork from this office." He put his glasses back on. He didn't deny it. He walked around the counter and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "You're upset," he said. "I get that. Nobody likes a surprise bill. It's not a bill. I said, "It's a federal crime. It's a leverage strategy." He corrected me, his voice condescendingly calm. "Your parents needed liquidity. The system is rigged against the little guy. Vivian, you miss one payment. They crush you. I just leveled the playing field. By committing identity theft? By utilizing available family assets." He said, "Your credit was an asset. It was sitting there, doing nothing. We put it to work. It fed you, didn't it? It kept a roof over your parents' heads. It bought that truck. The truck you hid." I snapped. "Asset protection," he said with a shrug. "Standard practice." He took a step toward me. He wasn't physically imposing, but there was a confidence in him that was terrifying. He acted like he was untouchable. "Here's the reality. Vivian," he said, "you're making a lot of noise. You're hiring lawyers. You're digging up IP addresses. And for what? To put your mother in prison? To clear my name? Your name is just letters in a database." He scoffed. "I can fix the database. You want the debt gone? I can make it gone." "How?" I asked. "I have access," he said. "I can file amendments. I can recategorize the liability. I can make the paperwork disappear. The agency is understaffed and overworked. If the file gets corrupted or lost in a transfer poof, it's gone." My heart hammered. He was offering to destroy federal records. "You can just delete $200,000? I asked, trying to sound tempted. "I can do a lot of things," he said, lowering his voice. "But not if you're screaming about fraud. If you keep pushing this investigation, you shine a light on everything. And when the light comes on, the cockroaches scatter, but the house burns down." He leaned in closer. "Sign the affidavit your mother gave you. Give me the authority to handle the audit. I'll make the debt vanish within 6 months. You walk away clean. Your parents stay free. Everyone wins. And if I don't?" He smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Then you're the owner," he said. "You're the responsible party. And I'm just a consultant who gave advice based on the information provided by the client. I have a waiver signed by your father, Vivian, indemnifying me against all claims. You go to war. You go to war alone against the United States government." He checked his watch. "I have a client coming in at 3. Think about it. Be a good daughter." I backed out of the office. I didn't turn my back on him until I was on the sidewalk. I got into my car and locked the doors. I pulled the recorder out of my purse. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I pressed stop, then play. The audio was crisp. I can file amendments. I can make the paperwork disappear. I can do a lot of things. He had admitted to the capability of manipulating federal records. He had admitted to the scheme. I didn't have a weapon. I had a nuclear bomb. The morning of the meeting with the Criminal Investigation Division was gray and raining. It felt appropriate. Sterling met me in the lobby of the federal building. He looked at my dark circles, at the way I was gripping my briefcase. "You ready?" he asked. "I want this over." I said. We went through security, belts off, shoes off, bags scanned, and took the elevator to the 14th floor. Agent Vance was waiting for us. She was joined by another agent, a man named Agent Thorne. No relation to the councilman, I hoped. We sat at a long metal table. Sterling opened his briefcase. I opened mine. We laid it out. Sterling spoke for the first hour. He walked them through the timeline, the Chicago alibi, the signature discrepancies, the IP logs linking the filing to the Oak Haven House and DR Business Solutions. Vance listened, taking notes, her face unreadable. Then it was my turn. "Ms. Henderson," Vance said, "you allege that this was a coordinated effort involving a third party. Do you have proof of that relationship?" "I do." I said. I pulled out the transcript of my conversation with Dale. Sterling had had it certified by a forensic audio specialist overnight. "This is a conversation I recorded 2 days ago," I said, sliding the transcript and a USB drive across the table. "With Dale Ross of DR Business Solutions. In this recording, he admits to structuring the entity to use my credit. He admits to hiding assets. And he offers to illegally alter federal records to remove the debt if I sign a false affidavit." Vance picked up the transcript. She put on her reading glasses. The room was silent for 5 minutes. The only sound was the turning of pages. When she reached the part about making the paperwork disappear, she stopped. She looked at Agent Thorne. A silent communication passed between them. A slight nod. She put the transcript down. She looked at me. "You went to see him?" she asked. "Yes." I said. "That was risky." She said. "And stupid. It was necessary." I countered. "You told me to find the assets. I found the architect." I pulled out the last piece of evidence, the construction bid for the municipal project signed by Councilman Thorne. "And this," I said, "is why they are so afraid of this investigation. It's not just about the taxes. It's about who they are paying with the money they didn't give you." Vance looked at the contract. Her eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her armor. "This is a municipal bid," she said, "for Oakhaven, signed by the councilman." I said, "While the company was insolvent." Vance gathered the documents. She stacked them neatly. She placed her hands on top of the pile. "Ms. Henderson," she said, "we will need to authenticate this recording. We will need to verify the bid documents." "I understand," I said, "but am I cleared?" Vance looked at me. Her expression was not kind, but it was professional. "The investigation is ongoing," she said, "but I will say this. Your documentation is consistent." That was it. No congratulations. No, you're free. Just consistent. We left the building. Sterling was smiling. That was a home run. He said as we hit the sidewalk, "Consistent is agent speak for, we believe you." It didn't feel like a win. I said, "It felt like I just turned my parents into the executioner." "You didn't turn them in." "Vivian," Sterling said, putting a hand on my shoulder, "you just stepped out of the way of the train." 3 days later, the letter came. I saw it in my mailbox and felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. It was from the Department of Justice, Tax Division. I took it upstairs. I sat on my couch. I used a letter opener, slicing the top cleanly. Notice of referral. Dear Miss Henderson, this letter is to inform you that the civil examination regarding Hearthstone Renovations, LLC, has been suspended. My heart leaped. Suspended. That was good. I read the next line. The case has been referred to the United States Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution due to indicators of fraud and willful evasion. I stopped breathing. Subjects of investigation. Redacted. I stared at the black bar. It didn't say Francis and Eleanor Henderson. It didn't say Dale Ross. It just said redacted. The letter continued. As a potential party to the inquiry, you may be contacted for further testimony. Do not destroy any records. I dropped the letter. I was technically a potential party. I was the responsible party on paper. Was I the subject? Or was I the witness? The government hadn't told me I was safe. They had just told me the war was escalating. I looked at the black bar again. Redacted. Under that black ink lay the fate of my family, and I didn't know if my name was under there with them. The phone call that saved my life, or at least, the financial version of my life, came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was staring at a water stain on my ceiling. Vivian. Marcus Sterling's voice was uncharacteristically light, lacking its usual gravelly weight. We just received a fax from the Department of Collections. The agency has issued a status update. I sat up, the blood rushing in my ears so loud it sounded like the ocean. "Tell me," I whispered. "They have placed the responsible party assessment in status 53, Sterling said. "That is the code for currently not collectible pending investigation. They have tentatively accepted our evidence regarding the identity theft and the lack of willfulness." "What does that mean?" I asked, gripping the phone. "Is it over?" "It means the levy is lifted," Sterling explained. "It means your bank accounts are unlocked. It means the lien on your credit report will be marked as disputed and suspended. You are not cleared. Vivian, not yet. The criminal investigation is still active, and they can reinstate the debt if they find new evidence linking you to the fraud. But for now, the guillotine has been pulled back up." I didn't cheer. I didn't laugh. I simply let the phone slide from my hand onto the couch cushion. I curled into a ball. my knees pressing against my chest. And I wept. It wasn't a cinematic cry. It was an ugly, gasping release of tension that had been held in my muscles for 3 months. I cried because I could buy groceries again. I cried because I wasn't going to be homeless. But mostly, I cried because I was exhausted down to the marrow of my bones. I felt like a survivor of a shipwreck who had just washed up on a beach, alive, but battered, shivering, and completely alone. The relief lasted exactly 6 hours. At 9 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I hadn't spoken to him since the day I found the truck in Aunt Linda's backyard, the day he had screamed that I owed him my life. I stared at the screen. Dad. The name felt like a relic from a different era. I answered. Hello? Vivian, he said. His voice was terrifying. It wasn't the booming, angry voice of the backyard confrontation. It wasn't the dismissive, gaslighting voice of the living room. It was calm, unnaturally, surgically calm. It sounded like the voice of a man who had checked the weather, checked his watch, and decided it was time to do something unpleasant. We need to meet, he said. I have nothing to say to you. I said, my hand shaking. My lawyer said, forget the lawyers, he interrupted, still with that flat, dead calm. We know the levy was lifted. We know the agency paused the collection against you. My stomach turned. How did they know? The notification had only come to Sterling hours ago. Dale has sources, he said, answering my unspoken question. But a pause isn't a pardon. Vivian, we need to close this chapter. Tonight, like adults. I'm not coming to the house, I said. The diner on Main, he said. The one near the highway. 20 minutes. If you don't come, we're going to have a very different conversation with the investigator tomorrow. Is that a threat? It's an invitation, he said. Don't be late. The line went dead. I called Sterling. It went to voicemail. I texted Sarah, my roommate from college, telling her where I was going and to call the police if I didn't text back in an hour. I drove to the diner. It was a 24-hour place with fluorescent lights that buzzed and smelled of burnt coffee and grease. It was neutral ground, public, safe, or so I thought. My parents were already there, sitting in a booth in the back corner. When I walked in, I was struck by how small they looked. My father's shoulders were slumped, his jacket hanging loosely on his frame. My mother looked aged, the skin around her eyes papery and dark. For a second, a pang of pity shot through me. They looked like frightened old people caught in a storm. Then I sat down, and I saw their eyes. There was no fear in my father's eyes. There was only a cold, hard calculation. You look tired. Vivi, my mother said. It was an instinctive opening, a reflex of motherhood that she couldn't suppress. Even now. I am tired, I said. I'm tired of fighting for my life against my own parents. You're not fighting for your life, my father said, taking a sip of his black coffee. You're fighting for a credit score. We are fighting for our freedom. You stole my identity, I said, keeping my voice low. You forged my signature. You bought a truck in my name and hid it. We did what was necessary, he said, waving his hand as if dismissing a minor parking ticket. But that's in the past. We're here to talk about the future. He leaned forward. The table was sticky. Dale says the agency is pivoting. My father said, they are looking for a witness. They want someone to pin the whole operation on. Right now, they are looking at us, but they are also looking at you. I didn't do anything. I said, that's your story, he said. But here's the reality. Vivian, you were the responsible party. You were the president. You have an accounting degree. You worked in the city. I work in marketing. I corrected. Close enough, he said. Here's the offer. You withdraw your affidavit. You tell the investigator that you authorized the business, that you knew about the filings, but you just didn't realize the taxes weren't being paid. You take the civil liability. Are you insane? I whispered. That puts the debt back on me. $247,000. We will pay it. My mother interjected, leaning in. Dale has a plan. We can settle it for pennies on the dollar if it's just a civil debt. But if it stays criminal, if they think we stole your identity, then we go to prison. Vivian, your father goes to prison. I can't do that. I said, I won't perjure myself. My father sighed. He looked at my mother, then back at me. Then we have no choice, he said. No choice about what? If you don't withdraw your statement, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. We will testify that you were the mastermind. The world stopped. The clatter of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator, the chatter of the waitress. It all vanished. What? I breathed. We will tell them it was your idea, he said. We will tell them you set up the LLC to help us because our credit was bad. We will tell them you managed the accounts from the city. We will tell them you took the cash withdrawals. They won't believe you. I said, my voice trembling, I have proof. I have the timeline. It's your word against ours, he said. 2 witnesses against 1. And we're your parents. Who are they going to believe? The struggling retirees who were manipulated by their college-educated daughter? Or the daughter who claims her sweet old parents are criminal masterminds? I looked at my mother. I waited for her to protest. I waited for her to say, no, Frank, we can't do that. We can't frame our own child. She looked down at her hands. She twisted her wedding ring. It's prison. Vivi, she whispered, I can't let him go to prison. He wouldn't survive it. I stared at them. I finally saw the bottom of the well. There was no water there, just dry, hard selfishness. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about the tax debt. It was about ownership. They believed they owned me. They believed that because they had given me life, they had the right to consume it. They saw me not as a person, but as a resource, an insurance policy they could cash in when the bill came due. If I surrendered now, if I took the blame to save them, I would never be free. I would be their slave forever. Every time they needed money, every time they made a mistake, they would dangle this over me. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. The panic was gone. The grief was gone. In their place was a cold, bright clarity. I sat up straight. I looked my father in the eye. Do it, I said. He blinked. What? Tell them. I said, go to the investigator. Lie to federal agents. Tell them I was the mastermind. We will. He threatened, his eyes narrowing. Good, I said, because then they will look at the IP logs. They will look at the signature variances. They will look at the fact that I was in Chicago when the company was formed, and when they find out you lied to them during a federal investigation, they won't just charge you with tax fraud. They will charge you with obstruction of justice and conspiracy. I leaned across the table. You think you can ruin me to save yourselves, I said, my voice steady and hard as diamond. But you don't get to do that. Not anymore. I am not your retirement plan. I am not your shield. I am the witness who is going to bury you. My father's face turned purple. He opened his mouth to speak, to roar, to bully me back into submission. Don't, I said. I'm recording this. I wasn't. My phone was in my purse, but the fear that flashed across his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was a coward, a bully and a coward. I stood up. I threw a $20 bill on the table for my coffee I hadn't touched. Goodbye, I said. I walked out of the diner. I didn't look back. I got into my car and locked the doors. I didn't cry. I felt lighter than air. I was driving home when the text came. It wasn't from my parents. It was from Janice, the bookkeeper. I pulled over to read it. Vivian, don't go to the office. Don't go near Dale. 2 guys in suits were there today. They took boxes. Dale is gone. The sign is down. He's closing shop. I think they are scrubbing the whole network. I'm scared. I stared at the message. Scrubbing the network. That didn't just mean shredding paper. It meant silencing loose ends. My stomach dropped. I wasn't just fighting a tax battle anymore. I was standing in the wreckage of a collapsing criminal enterprise. Dale wasn't just a consultant. He was a fixer. And fixers didn't leave evidence behind. I drove the rest of the way to my condo with one eye on the rearview mirror. Every pair of headlights looked suspicious. Every shadow looked like a threat. I parked in the garage and took the elevator up. I had my keys in my hand, the new heavy brass ones I had bought after the lockout. I reached my door. It was unlocked. Not just unlocked, it was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible between the door and the frame. I froze. I stood in the hallway, the silence pressing against my ears. I listened. Nothing. No movement inside. I pushed the door open with my foot, staying in the hallway. "Hello?" I called out. Silence. I stepped inside. The apartment was dark. I flipped the switch. It hadn't been ransacked. The TV was still on the wall. My laptop was still on the desk. The jewelry box on my dresser was untouched, but the coffee table was empty. The stacks of files, the binders, the timeline, the copy of the municipal contract, the transcript of the recording with Dale, gone. I ran to the closet where I kept the coat, the one with the original documents hidden in the lining. I tore the coat open. The lining was slashed. The envelope was gone. I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't come for money. They had come for the truth. I frantically checked my hiding spot under the floorboard in the pantry, the place Sterling had told me to keep the master backup drive. I pulled up the loose board. The drive was there. I collapsed onto the kitchen floor, clutching the small silver USB drive to my chest. They had missed it. Or maybe they hadn't. Maybe they left it to let me know they could have taken it. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. We can get in. We can touch your life. You are not safe. My phone rang in the silence of the violated apartment. It made me scream. I looked at the screen. It was Sterling. I answered, my voice hysterical. They broke in. They took the files. They took everything. "Vivian, listen to me," Sterling said. His voice was urgent. "Get out of the apartment. Now. Go to the police station. Do not pass go." "They took the contract." I sobbed. "They took the transcript. Do you have the digital backups?" "Yes, I have the drive." "Then you have the leverage," Sterling said. "Bring it to me. We aren't waiting for the subpoena anymore. We are going on offense." I grabbed the drive. I didn't pack a bag. I ran out of the apartment, leaving the door wide open. I didn't care who went in there anymore. There was nothing left of me in there to steal. I met Sterling at his office at 2 a.m. He looked disheveled, like he had slept in his suit. "This changes the posture," he said, plugging the drive into an air-gapped laptop, breaking and entering, tampering with evidence. "This is no longer a tax case. This is a RICO case." "RICO?" I asked. "Like the mob?" "Like organized crime," Sterling said. "Dale Ross isn't just a bad accountant. He's running a syndicate. Your parents were just soldiers, and you just became the star witness." He looked at me. "If we hand this over, Vivian, there is no going back. Once the Department of Justice has this drive, the recording, the contract, the IP logs, they will indict everyone. Your father, your mother, the councilman, everyone." He paused. "Are you sure?" I thought about the diner. I thought about my father's face when he threatened to frame me. I thought about the door ajar, the violation of my sanctuary. I thought about the little girl who used to sit on the porch and wait for her dad to come home, hoping he would bring her a candy bar. That girl was dead. My parents had killed her to save a few dollars on payroll taxes. "I'm sure." I said, "Burn it down." Sterling nodded. He picked up the phone. "Get me the U.S. attorney on the emergency line." 2 days later, I was sitting in a room I had never seen before. It was a sensitive compartmented information facility, a SCIF, inside the federal building. The table was long and polished. Opposite me sat Agent Vance, Agent Thorne, and a woman introduced as Assistant United States Attorney Miller. "Ms. Henderson," Miller said. She was young, sharp, and terrifying. "We have reviewed the contents of the drive you provided." I nodded. I couldn't speak. "The recording of Mr. Ross is compelling," she said, "as are the bid documents involving Councilman Thorne. We have successfully verified the IP addresses linked to the fraudulent filings." She opened a file. "We are preparing to unseal indictments." She continued, "We are moving against the entire network. D.R. Business Solutions, Hearthstone Renovations, and 3 other shell companies operating in the county. She looked at me. This will be public. Your name will be in the papers, not as a defendant, but as the whistleblower. Am I clear? I asked. Is the debt gone? We have formally removed the responsible party designation from your file. Agent Vance said, you are no longer liable for the $247,000. The seizure of the truck has been authorized to satisfy a portion of the restitution. I closed my eyes. The number was gone. The weight was gone. However, Miller said, her voice dropping, we need you to do one more thing. What? I asked, opening my eyes. We need you to come in for a confrontational interview. She said, we are bringing in the other subjects for questioning tomorrow. We need you here, in the building. My parents? I whispered. The subjects, she repeated, refusing to use the word. We need to gauge their reaction to your presence. It often elicits a confession. You want me to sit in a room with them? We want you to sit behind the glass, she said. We want them to know you are the one watching. I felt a cold shiver. It was the ultimate reversal. They had watched me struggle for months. Now, I would watch them fall. And one more thing. Miller added, the investigation has expanded. We found links to accounts that go beyond the councilman. There are transactions moving through Hearthstone that suggest money laundering for entities outside the state. She leaned forward. Your parents were a small part of this, Ms. Henderson. But the door you opened? It leads to a very large, very dark room. We need to know if you are ready to walk into it. I thought about the message on the voicemail. Stop digging. I thought about the slashed lining of my coat. I looked at the agents. I looked at the lawyer. I realized that my life as Vivian Henderson, the marketing coordinator, was over. I was something else now. I was the woman who had survived her own family. I'm ready, I said. Miller nodded. Good, because we're just getting started. The meeting ended. I walked out of the federal building into the bright, blinding sunlight. The city noise washed over me. I was free of the debt. I was free of the lies. But as I walked down the steps, I checked my reflection in a shop window. I looked different. The softness was gone. The hesitation was gone. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was the storm that had finally made landfall. Thank you for listening to this story. It was a journey into the darkest corners of trust and betrayal. And I hope it resonated with you. We often think of family as our safety net, but sometimes it's the net that traps us. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to protect yourself from people you love? Where are you listening from today? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of justice, revenge, and the complex reality of human relationships, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss a part. Thank you for your time, and remember, sometimes, saving yourself is the only victory that matters. Stay safe.